All right, let's go to the phones. Calling from a 510 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Joseph from Berkeley. How are you doing?
Doing good. Joseph, what's on your mind?
Well, first of all, I want to say, at the risk of sounding extravagant, it's an honor to talk to both of you. I've been watching the show for a long, long time. So,
thank you. Our pleasure.
So what's on my mind is Ukraine. Emma, I maybe a week or two ago heard you what appeared to me sound like you support the U.S. supporting Ukraine in what I consider this U.S. provoked proxy war. And am I correct about that?
Well, yes, I do support, and I have supported our helping of Ukraine with their defense. I have been critical, though, of, what seems to be a very kind of aimless strategy by the Biden administration. It seems as though there's been some reporting, and we don't really know. I know with The Intercept, I think, backed this up, that there was a deal on the table in 2022 that they didn't take. But generally, yes, I supporting Ukraine in their defense against Russia.
Me too.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry. Did you say something, Sam?
Me too.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. The audio quality isn't entirely clear on my end. But let me say, Emma, I consider you an extremely intelligent person. And so I was surprised to hear that you support, the hundreds of billions of dollars going to what I consider this U.S. proxy war in Ukraine. And I'll just mention a couple of names.
Can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question?
Sure, please.
I mean, I get that I get that the U.S. obviously has enormous interest in the outcome of this war. But do you think that the U.S. intended to have Russia invade Ukraine?
What I believe, and if you listen to people like John Mearsheimer or Jeffrey Sachs or Ray McGovern,
I do,
or Claire Daly, the Irish MEP, or Scott Ritter, or Juan Gonzalez, Chris Hedges, George Galloway, I believe, and they point this out, that numerous experts, like the current head of the CIA, William Burns, numerous experts pointed out that if the U.S. tried to expand NATO into Ukraine, there would be major trouble, that this was a bright red line.
When did what was the indication that the U.S. was trying to expand NATO into Ukraine?
Excuse me, Sam. I'm at a loss because that's so obvious, and so many people have pointed out.
Well, let's tell everybody how obvious it is. Let's tell everybody. What was that?
Well, it's a fact that the U.S. was trying to recruit Ukraine into NATO.
No. Ukraine wanted to be in NATO.
I'm sorry?
Ukraine was interested in. Ukraine has been trying to get into NATO. Ukraine was trying to get into the EU.
And also Bush, if you want to go back to the Bush era, you can say that, Bush made some unwise assurances upon him leaving office on that front. But I don't know if there's evidence to support what you're saying about there being an active effort by the Biden administration at this time to get Ukraine into NATO. I don't think that's true. And I think it's also a little bit simplistic to refer to this purely as a U.S. proxy war against Russia, because, yes, the United States has interests in weakening Russia in this regard. But there's also Ukrainians who are interested in protecting their territorial boundaries, which, like, their sovereignty sometimes gets lost in this situation.
Let me ask you a question. When Barack Obama mocked Mitt Romney in the 2012 debate, because Mitt Romney said that Russia was our number one enemy, was that an example of the Obama administration trying to get Ukraine into NATO?
You know, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question one way or the other. But you know, another.
Well, let me ask you this: when Russia invaded Crimea and the Donbass, was that an opportunity for the U.S. to get Ukraine into NATO?
Well, you know, I just gave you a list of names who are experts.
No, I know you've listed off a bunch of names, and I appreciate that. And there's a couple of them that I listen to. Frankly, there's a couple that I think are cranks on that list, if you want to know the truth.
Can you tell me who are the cranks?
Ritter.
Isn't Ritter
well, I can tell you this. There's a lot of things that I like that Chris Hedges has written about in the past. But I also know that 16 years ago, I was sitting in an office with Chris, and he's telling me that our debt, that China was going to take over this country within like a year or two because of our debt. And I'm like, oh, that is not a sound opinion. But he was 100% sure of it. And I, you know, there's a lot of stuff that he writes about that I think is good. I don't know that Chris Hedges has these insights. Now, Sachs, I think is, and Mearshur, I listen to them. I think they're both, I don't think they're out there. Their word is gospel. But I think that they're interesting perspectives. But you just saying that two people whom I listen to say this, and therefore you don't need to back up with what you're saying after you've told me that it's so obvious that you're surprised. I mean,
okay. May I say something? Do you consider John Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs to be wackos?
I like Mearsheimer a lot.
Like,
yeah.
I think that I think they have valid opinions, but I don't think that they're gods.
Yeah, there's other people that comment on this stuff.
Okay.
I mean, I literally just asked you, what are instances in which the United States were actively blocked from bringing Ukraine into NATO? And you told me, like, that's ridiculous. You were shocked that I could even say that. And now I'm asking you just to give me one.
Excuse me, I would never call you ridiculous. I respect you too much, and I don't engage in.
Well, I didn't say you said that I was ridiculous. You said it was ridiculous that I didn't know.
No, I don't believe I used the word ridiculous, but if you heard that.
Whatever the word is, you're shocked, you're surprised, whatever. Yes. Just tell me.
I did say I was amazed, because if you listen to people like John Mearsheimer, which I hope you don't consider a wacko, or Jeffrey Sachs, I hope you don't consider a wacko, or Claire Daly, who certainly is not a wacko, or Ray McGovern, or Juan Gonzalez, I mean, I hope you don't consider people like that wackos. And if you listen to the interviews on YouTube or the podcast, you know, they can provide ample evidence.
I just don't understand why you cannot provide me with an argument to this. But if you just want to outsource it, have them call into the program.
Well, but if Mearsheimer, caller, if Mearsheimer and other people, you know, who I really like, are saying that this is a proxy for the United States in its rivalry with Russia, that's not inaccurate. That's accurate. But it's also this other thing. So it is Mearsheimer, or are these folks claiming that this is purely the motivation? Because if that's the case, we'll say that we disagree.
I'm sorry, if what's purely the motivation?
That the pretext of your call, which was that there were plans to get Ukraine into NATO that you haven't really specified, honestly, in the that preceded Russia's invasion into Ukraine in 2022, and also that it's purely a proxy war waged by the United States against Russia, as opposed to the United States heavily funding and abetting Ukrainian defense against Russia in their territorial battle.
Well, you don't believe that the U.S. with Victoria Nuland and the State Department, you don't believe that they heavily funded and sponsored Zelensky and the overthrow of the democratically elected government of Ukraine?
Yeah, I don't believe that that was a coup. I don't believe that it was a coup.
Okay, well, you're entitled to that. Let me ask you, what do you think would happen if Russia or China tried to set up a hostile military alliance in Mexico? The U.S. would invade, and Russia has at least.
I'll tell you
5
something.
times-
I don't. Excuse me. Wait a second. I don't. I actually. I don't know what you mean by this, but there was a negotiated deal in '93. Where if Ukraine was to give up its nuclear weapons, the United States would assure its defense. You're aware of that, correct?
That's part of the truth. That's not the entire truth.
Well, tell me what I've
missing
gotten
the
wrong
critical
about
part
that.
on it.
Tell me what I got wrong about that.
Oh, okay. Well, my understanding, and I believe that you're taking me off onto tangents, but my understanding was that those were Russian nuclear weapons. They were not Ukrainian nuclear weapons.
Well, yeah. Guess
But I
what?
believe
Ukraine didn't. They were Soviet nuclear weapons, and there was no more Soviet
Oh,
Union.
I'm sorry. Yes. Well,
But-
no, I
but
agree. They were Soviet
Ukraine
nukes,
had
not
control of
nuclear
those
weapons.
nukes. Ukraine had control of those nukes. So, in your scenario, if Mexico had nukes, and they were, and we wanted them gone in the United States because we don't want Mexico to have nukes, do we? And there was some alliance where if we invaded Mexico, that somebody had guaranteed defense in the event that they gave up those nukes. And then I should say, we invaded Mexico.
It'd be a crime.
I would have a real problem with us invading Mexico in that instance.
Would we be justified, Colin?
Because what? Like, I mean, did you think that like we should have? Because there was there's a base in Mexico. Is that what you're suggesting? Like in your analogy, what happens in Mexico that says it's justified for us to invade?
You mean if Russia or China set up a hostile military alliance in Mexico, would it be justified for
What does
the
that
US
mean,
to
a
invade
hostile
them?
military alliance? Like, you mean they made they did what with Mexico? They just signed an accord?
If Russia or China set up a hostile military alliance in
What does that mean,
Mexico-
hostile military alliance? What creates it? What makes it hostile?
Okay, hostile in that the U.S. apparently considers Russia and China to be hostile countries to the interests of the
Okay,
United States.
I get that.
What does a hostile military alliance? So if China and Russia set up a military alliance with Mexico, you think that would justify an American invasion?
Well, first of all, if I'm correct, Emma just agreed with me. That
No.
Just stay here. Stay here. Keep your eyes on me.
Sure, go
You're
ahead.
saying, I just want to be clear. If
please.
Mexico signed an alliance with China and Russia, or China or Russia for that matter,
A hostile military alliance.
well, I don't know what a hostile military alliance is. There's no, we don't have an alliance that says we're making a hostile military alliance. We may we may make an alliance that says their defense in '93, which apparently we didn't, we were a little bit slow on the uptake of that, right? It took 2 different invasions before we even started to provide them weaponry. So let me be clear. If Russia was to make an alliance with Mexico that says, if you're intact, we will defend you, that's justification in your mind for a U.S. invasion of Mexico.
And if Russia or China set up military bases, nuclear-armed military bases in Mexico.
Okay, wait a second.
So,
So
my
the
answer-
U.S. So you're telling me the U.S. had nuclear military bases in Ukraine prior to this invasion?
That's what would happen if Ukraine joined NATO.
No.
let me give you-
Ukraine has not joined NATO. I'm asking
I
you
said
if what would it take for it to be justified that America invaded Mexico, and you're telling me to set up nuclear bases in Mexico. Well, U.S., as far as I know, prior to the invasion, did not have nuclear bases in Ukraine. Now, if that's the case, I didn't know it.
And in your example, Mexico is in this is in the military alliance already, and Ukraine isn't. So this doesn't even apply. This would be if there were rumblings that Mexico could join this military alliance, and it hadn't happened yet.
Look what happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
Okay, look, I'm going to say
JFK,
goodbye now. I'm going to say goodbye now.
But no, that's the problem, is the Cuban Missile Crisis. What you are saying is that America would have been justified to invade Cuba, and they weren't. What they did was back down, which is what both sides should have done here.
Okay, and I agree with you, but I'm talking about the reality of the matter. JFK would not have had a moral right to invade Cuba, but he threatened to blow up the entire, at least northern hemisphere, if the Soviets did not remove its nuclear weapons from Cuba.
I don't understand how I can get this through your head. Are you telling me that there are American bases in Ukraine with nuclear weapons as of the date that Russia invaded Ukraine? Yes or no?
No, they weren't.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the call.
You know what, Sam?
Oh.
No. You had 15 minutes. And when I asked you a question, you said, A, you're amazed that I'm asking that question. And then B, the answer lies with George Galloway.
Scott Ritter, thanks.
Also, the insistence that nuclear weapons and nuclear warfare is involved as it relates to NATO, you see right-wing commentators go to that all the time. We're going to World War III. There's going to be nuclear warfare. You got to wonder who's elevating the stakes of this kind of NATO situation in terms of saying that kind of weaponry would be used. And you find that a lot of those right-wing commentators were getting checks from Russia via tenant media.
Yeah, like the problem is, like, when you say it's the reductiveness. Like, Victoria Nullans and those type of neocons exist, and people that wanted NATO expansion, they always existed. But the idea that this was some kind of conspiracy, Vladimir Ischenko, who is, I think, maybe the name I would drop on this, said that in the run-up to the invasion, Zelensky thought that America was overinflating the risk of an invasion because they're trying to.
Everybody was mocking the Biden administration for saying they're trying to invade.
But in Zelensky's mind, he thought they were trying to convince him to drop the NATO stuff, right? So the idea that this is all it's stupid. Like, there are, and I have plenty of time for people going after Noland and neocons like that. I think they are a problem, and I think they're 100%. One of the reasons we're in the problem we're in right now. But it's a civil war, and it's also a proxy war. And again, I'd read Vladimir Ischenko before a lot of those people that he referenced.
It's just the insistence that this was provoked. I'm sorry. I think that there are things that the United States should have done differently in the context of post-Soviet Union, without a doubt. But I mean, was this all a big plan to get like Finland and Sweden and into NATO? Like, why did they why did they all of a sudden decide that they're going to go into NATO?
Because Russia invaded. I mean,
well, of course.
But that's a naturally occurring situation. Well, first, I would need a lot of evidence that the caller did not provide that there was some sort of provocation in that regard as it relates to the United States and Ukraine to get then these other two near border states into NATO. But that has not been provided, nor did he provide that in that call whatsoever. I
want to make it clear, no big fans of NATO here. I don't know, like 6 to 8 months beforehand, we had guests on talking about how NATO was obsolete, and then Putin basically shows up to say, well, maybe not. I mean, I don't think the United States, if they had wanted to bring Ukraine into NATO, would have done so a long time. Now, I have no doubt that United States and Western Europe wanted to bring Ukraine within the Western European economic sphere, and Russia undoubtedly had some issues with that. Does that justify an invasion? I wouldn't defend the United States doing that.
No. It's crazy how many people that justify Russia's invasion don't understand that they were justifying, like, again, a ground invasion of Cuba because of Bay of Pigs or the missile crisis.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.